things we keep talking about AI is making everybody more productive. But oftentimes the conversation is about making the more junior people productive. What if we focused on the more senior, the top people in your organization? Colin Britton from Devicey joins me. We knew one another back in the Logic Now days, and he's got some ideas on the AI promise on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Today's episode is supported by CoreView. Your customers need your Microsoft 365 expertise, and CoreView has the only M365 management platform designed for MSPs. Manage hundreds of tenants, automate manual tasks, and monitor compliance, all while intelligently comparing to the baseline. With a no-code control approach, CoreView revolutionizes your Microsoft 365 administration. This powerful platform enables automatic reporting and remediation, ensuring optimal performance and security. The best part? You achieve this high level of service without the need for a large workforce, allowing you to focus on growing your business through efficiency. Want to know more? Visit coreview.com/MSP and find out more. Well, Colin, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Now, for listeners, you and I know one another because we worked together back in the Logic Now days, but I want to make sure they get a good sense of your career path because you've been doing a lot of work that we didn't call AI at the time, much more like data science, machine learning, but you've got a lot of experience along this line, including a product they may have known in Logic Cards. But give me a little bit of your trajectory on what you've been doing with what we now are talking about AI, but this lineage of technologies.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, going back, I've lived in English, but I've lived in the States for 30 years. And when I came to the States, I was a product manager / sales engineer for a content management company. And at that time, what we were doing was like media assets for print, right? And which eventually transitioned into websites and advertising. But it all became about the metadata and the management of the organization. And so I got into these concepts of, unstructured data, semi-structured data, and, how can we use that to better find things, better manage things, etc., without having a kind of tightly coupled setup. And so through that startup and then, the next one, eventually I ended up in the advertising space. Digital ads, and we built a lead generation business which was the largest provider of automotive leads in the country, privately held, and it was all driven by data. And before we were talking about data science and this kind of stuff, but it was how do we collect as much information as possible to be as intelligent with matching leads and understanding what's going on in the buying ecosystem. And team of a handful of people built it, and we went from nothing to the largest independent provider of automotive leads in the country in 18 months. And it was all data driven. And then we sold it. I got introduced to a good friend of mine, Walter Scott, who is a IT CEO who's been through a number of companies, and Logic Now was one of those. And he's like, yes, that stuff you did for advertising, could we apply it? I think we can apply it to any other business. And so I started down this journey of, okay, how do we use the exhaust of any given system to better understand what's going on and create better outcomes? And as you said, Logic Cards was one example of that, like very early on. It was like, okay, let's just look at all this data and say, in comparison to your peers, how are you doing? In comparison to what we think is, our best standard, like what Dave says to do, right? How do we adjust, and recommend to you different things? And did that. I have done a decade now of IT growth stage companies. I work principally with Insight Partners, who are the growth stage fund that was behind TeamViewer, Logic Now, Live Action, DNS Filter, Evo, and now Devicey. And again, a lot of what we've done and continue to do is that same thing. And of course, the tools get better and the capabilities get better, but it's it's now got proper names to it. We talk about data science, we talk about data engineering. Data engineering is a first-class citizen now, which it wasn't back then. And yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Well, and that's what brought it, because when we were reconnected recently, you have this idea of the AI promise as it applies to business operations, and I think it's kind of like the vision has crystallized a lot. Give me your description of what you think the AI promise is right now in business ops.
Well, we've often used data to reinforce and kind of to raise the bar generally, but it's typically been at the lowest common denominator. And I think the AI promise is to go the other way, which is the highest common denominator. So in business operations, you should be able to increase the productivity of your best players and increase the productivity of your pool overall, but from a top-down perspective, not a bottom-up. Right? Many of the tools that people produced before were about how do I just skill up somebody, and your best players didn't get any more productive. Right? They would actually skip it and not use it or cheat on it, etc. With the AI promise, it starts to become the other way down because the critical thinking becomes much more important when you've got AI there. And I'll give you a really quick example. A friend of mine the other day who's a data scientist, super smart guy. He's like working on some dashboards, and he's like, I don't have to write code anymore. Like ChatGPT writes my code. And he said, you don't have to learn a new language. And he had one chart that he was asked to do for some data. And he's like, this is kind of like dumb. But he gave a screenshot of the chart to ChatGPT and told it to give him the Python code to recreate it. And from a screenshot, it wrote the code. And it's like, yeah, it was 95% there, minor tweak, and it was done. And that's like you were saying, the critical thinking around what do I want to solve and how do I ask the AI of this is what I think becomes the superpower. He could have handed that off to a junior staff member, but the actual handoff time and the effort would have been like significant, right? So instead, he's got this assistant, AI assistant, and he gets it done like that, right? Even kind of simple tasks.
And it's interesting because it's paralleling my own personal experience. For listeners, there's some AI code now that's helping produce the show, and it's not something that I've handed off. It's that, I can get additional elements of productivity out of doing it myself. And I like this approach of, looking at making your best even better to outperform. Yep. But that feels hard. How do you identify and benchmark the best employees? Like, how do you do that to then focus on the right places?
Well, I think it's a lot of it is about putting the tools in front of people and seeing how they want to engage, right, and encouraging them. So, we're a Microsoft shop, and we're a Microsoft partner in a number of areas. So we engage with their tool set, and we use Copilot, and Copilot is a great example of where meetings now. The note taking is just so much better, right? I get a meeting summary, I get action items pulled out of it, I get all the context of what went on, even if I'm not at the meeting. So the use of those kind of tools to drive kind of better action and drive better productivity is significant. And I think that's like engaging with people. And we're still at this stage where some people are, Big Brother AI is all coming up. I'm like, my life has been driven by data. And so I'm like, honestly, people like get over it, right? You will be there. This is like people talking about the internet getting rid of newspapers, right? It's gonna happen, right? AI is going to change your life. So, and your work life in particular. So kind of engage. And so I think you kind of find that part of it. And it's about showing people the critical thinking. And at this stage, we've got to give them better examples and show them. But there's a lot of stuff around. So you get a system, say like Intune, right? And it's incredibly powerful. And you get, subject matter experts who can do amazing things with it. But for a lot of users, going into it occasionally, they, it takes time to remember. The great thing about AI is you can very quickly and interactively, ask questions and say, okay, what's the best setting for this, right? What's the, what is industry standard or what is best practice, or tell me about, without kind of leaving the environment. The context switching part really kind of gets taken away there. So I think it's that kind of, it is definitely a mentality around it that you've got to engage. And we're starting to see that more and more in kind of general IT area, and particularly MSPs.
Now, I want to think a little bit about this as you apply this. So let's say we start getting AIs that are helping our top performers be really great. Well, then the next logical bit is that we can replicate that behavior. Doesn't that start impacting our labor needs pretty aggressively? Like, what's your take on how that plays out?
So I'm not going to name names, but we're working with a MSP right now. They're talking about a 70% productivity improvement. And at that level, this is role impacting, right? At 20, 30%, you're like, yes, I can make my people 20, 30% more effective, and that's great. And therefore I'll increase, how much they can get through. But at 70%, your business is not growing at 70%, right? So what do you do? You're going to have to, resize the business or change the roles or that kind of thing. I think it's, it's going to take time for people to get to it, but they really are going to have to think about that part of the business. And the labor, we all know the labor arbitrage model is a challenge, right? Particularly in the MSP space, because margins become very fixed, and there's continued price pressure on organizations. So how do you kind of balance those things in? And you're going to have to change the shape of the organization as this comes along. But preparing for it is equally part of it.
Now, you're a guy who spends a lot of time on operations. I want to throw a premise at you, and I want to get your reaction to it. So oftentimes when we talk about productivity gains, the immediate next step is the thought of, well, maybe we could reduce the number of people. I'm making an argument that actually what we can actually do is also pass some of those gains onto the employees as a retention element. So, for example, when we talk about the idea of moving to the 4-day work week, one of the ways you can do that is if everybody gets a 70% boost, we don't need as much physical time, potentially. And so we could actually make the employment environment better and retain better people longer, because they're getting the advantage too. The business gets the advantage and the employee gets the advantage. What's your take on that premise?
I am some of my favorite engineers are what I would call lazy people. And what I mean by that is they get things done efficiently and effectively in a short amount of time, and then they occupy themselves with other things outside of that. And it's always been one of my favorite motions, which is, the engineer who is kind of disappears off to Asia for 2 months and you don't even realize because he's still getting his work done. And, you ask for something, you get it immediately, etc. And that kind of, different way of working. Now, that doesn't suit some people. So that's a kind of different thing. But I think what we're going to see with productivity gains like this is that balance of what's required does change. And as organizations, we can be more flexible, and we can do that. And I think there's a number of ways with it. Different people have different motivations. I do think that this is going to help with burnout, right? Burnout is a problem in our space. And I think burnout is a bigger issue than the some of the other sides of it, and it's often the how can I put it, the silly mistakes, right, that shouldn't be made, that come out of that are impacting, that a more productive person will avoid.
Now, I'm gonna throw it out in a broad sense, because I'm not one of those people that likes talking about P-doom. That's not the way that I think about this. What I actually want to think about is more like, what are the ethical concerns that come to mind for you that you think business leaders, owners of IT services organizations, and their customers should be addressing Like, what are those ethical concerns that you think are the most important?
Ooh, I think there's ethics is one part of it, along with obviously security concerns, right? And leakage and all of this kind of stuff. I think you've got to think about how you're using these tools in a way that how you're exposing your business data out there. Um, but you shouldn't be too paranoid about it at the same time, right? There's a level of people are willing to post on Reddit, which is like the number one training source for most of our industries, AI. But like they're like, yes, but I'm not gonna not gonna let it read my email, right? You kind of got to have that level of trust in there, but at the same time, in an organization which is using things like Copilot, if all of your board documents and all of your underlying business documents are on SharePoint and it's reading them, and somebody goes and asks, what's the salary of the CEO, or how many shares does so and so have, or what's their co-worker's salary, right? And the AI can answer it. That's a challenge, right? So you've got to have Microsoft's line for it is secure productivity, right? So it's this combination of you've got to make sure your data is organized well and the tools are in place that you can be productive, but you've got to be able to do it in a secure way. And that's about, the usual things that we always talk about, which is, how your data is organized, where you're keeping it, and, how your endpoints are managed and organized as well.
So what's a healthy level of paranoia in your mind? Like, kind of, what's the balance that you strike?
You know me. I am very forward leaning, right? So as a person, but in my role, like I'm the COO. So much as I've got a product background over the years, I've built a lot of experience with how to grow businesses and that kind of stuff. And so I'm I get very paranoid around customer data and around how that is and the separation of concerns within that and how you kind of deal with that. I get pretty paranoid about financial information and board data and make sure that's. But in terms of broad internal communication, product documentation, even architectural schemas and that kind of stuff, I'm a lot more tolerant on that area. A good example is like often people get kind of paranoid about their SOC 2 reports. And that's kind of one, yes, somebody could go read that and do some, and understand your business and, do some things from it. But my argument on a lot of that is they can probably figure that out. Like if they're coming after you, they're coming after you, right? Your SOC 2 report's not going to be the primary source of how they got to you. Some phishing attack on, one of your engineers is more likely, right? Or something like that. So, yeah, that's kind of where my paranoia sits with it.
That's a good line because you're exactly right. They're going to find the simple bit and frankly protect the simple entry points and don't over worry those other ends.
90% of breaches come from an endpoint. 90+%. It's here, right? This is where the problem is, right? And these devices that we're using more often than not, right? And
that is totally how they're going to hack us. Well, Colin Britton is the Chief Operating Officer at Devicey, focused on growth and global operational scaling. He's been in companies such as TeamViewer, DNS Filter, Devo, Live Action, and Logic Now, where we met, and which is now part of Enable. Colin, thanks for joining me today.
Great to join you, and always good to catch up.
Looking to reach an audience of thousands of MSPs and IT service providers? Put your ad right here on the Business of Tech and be on the show that 64% of MSPs report having listened to. A recurring top 50 tech news podcast, there are affordable options for you to reach our audience, and we can support any budget. Podcast listeners are more engaged, have a higher level of brand retention, and are more willing to listen to ads here than any other avenues. Want to know more? There's information at mspradio.com/engage, including a button to book a time to talk. I'm looking forward to that discussion. The Business of Tech is written and produced by me, Dave Sobel, under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you like the content, please make sure to hit that like button and follow or subscribe. It's free and easy and the best way to support the show and help us grow. You can also check out our Patreon, where you can join the Business of Tech community at patreon.com/MSP Radio, or buy our Why Do We Care merch at businessof.tech. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on the show, visit mspradio.com/engage. Once again, thanks for listening to me, and I will talk to you again on our next episode of The Business of Tech.
Part of the MSP Radio Network.